Okay, we now have about half an hour left to wrap things up, and I'm hoping that's what we're going to do, in the sense of this is the time to come back to things from earlier, maybe tie together some of the themes of the different discussions, consider further outstanding questions, consider kind of where do we go from here. I'm just going to start things out on that last note by saying that there will be an important opportunity to do some more of that after today, this coming Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. at the Quaker Meeting House on Upper Goat Lane here in Norwich, so quite close. There will be a meeting hosted by the Quakers about climate change and what we can do about it in relation to the situation here in Norwich and Norfolk, and in relation to the situation nationally and internationally. I'll be chairing the meeting. Among the key speakers are two people who are in the room, Andrew Boswell, who you've heard from a little bit, and Joe Veltman. Give us a wave, Joe. And part of the discussion will be about what we can do by way of climate litigation. Some of you will be aware of Plan B, an alternative to the disastrous course that we're currently on. Joe will be, I think, talking about Plan B, is that right? Yeah. So that's a great opportunity to take some of this forward in terms of concrete further initiatives, including political and legal initiatives, and I hope we'll see some of you there. Just to say that again, that's from 6 till 8 p.m. this Wednesday evening at the Quaker Meeting House on Upper Goat Lane, very close to here. But now we've got the rest of this afternoon here to do, as I say, a little bit of wrapping up, following up. What further questions do you have? What further comments do you have, reflections on the day? We're open to all comers, and so can I see some hands? Yes.
Right at the beginning, hope Brian doesn't take this personally because I really like him, but I thought he was completely illogical the way he took his analysis of the possibility of the future, because you have to remember that you cannot predict the behaviour of a system of which you are yourself a part, because of self-fulfilling prophecy. And just by being so pessimistic, he might force us into not even trying to do the things that we know we need to do, and that are physically possible. It just means having a different mindset. And, you know, were we to have, just imagine a thought experiment. Imagine this was war. You know, we wouldn't be bothering about, you know, capitalists having made investments and wanting to make their money back and continuing to use these coal-fired power stations that they just built. We'd just be banning them, banning flying, banning driving, banning eating meat. That's the sort of thing that we need to do, and it is possible to do that.
Okay, so that's a bold point of view. Brian isn't here, unfortunately, he's had to leave. So let me just make a quick response to that. Maybe others will want to come in as well from a sort of greenhousey point of view to explain where we're coming from. What we're trying to do with the Facing Up to Climate Reality project is to puncture the balloon of vapid, undeserved optimism. We're not saying don't try to make brilliant, huge changes to our society like you're proposing, Chris. We're saying that there are ways of pursuing that optimism which are more effective or less effective, or more well-grounded and less well-grounded. So to speak personally, I was a little unimpressed, as some of you will have gathered from my question, by Asher Minz's presentation, which followed Brian's, which seemed to me to put forward a lot of optimism which was entirely unwarranted. He gave absolutely no reason to believe that the Paris climate change goals are going to be achieved. Whereas Brian gave, I think, some quite good reasons for thinking that they're very unlikely to be achieved. Of course, you're right, Chris. In principle, they could be achieved because we're human beings. You know, we can, to some extent, make our own reality. But the question is whether it's really the best starting point to be thinking of where we're at now in relation to the climate change problem, to still assume, for example, that, well, yes, of course we can make 1.5 degrees. All we have to do is think big and have lots of hope or something like that, which kind of seemed to me to be what Asher was saying. So a little controversial remark from me, from the chair there. We've got quite a few hands maybe coming in on this back there, sir.
I'm going to totally defend him, and I think it links in.
Could you stand up and speak up a bit?
I would defend Asher on this, and I think it links in with what the guy was talking about just now. He's using the term banning this and banning that, and is this a war scenario? And I think the problem here is that we have lots of people who are same values, same ideas, all reasonably well educated, and have a sense, an understanding of this. But really, the war, the battle, is with people who are not in this room. And it's convincing them. And Ash's presentation was looking really at how you get that message across, and I think that's so critical, because what you are dealing with in society now is many people are self-interested. They have a nod to this stuff, but it's not really part of their life. They're still buying into the culture, buying into commodities, buying into a way of life which is killing them. It's going to kill them and their children. And at the end of Ashir's presentation, he was talking about how the car, the exhaust fumes, is killing kids. And I would say that is the most critical thing I would take from today. You think about all these people, they're living their lives, they're taking Johnny to school in their car, and they're worrying about their children's exam results, and they're doing this, and they're doing that. And their lifestyle is killing those kids. And if they don't stop doing this stuff now, they are going to be party to killing their children and everybody else's kids.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? Yes, sir.
I've only just heard about this meeting you've mentioned on Wednesday, and it's really bad timing, because also on Wednesday evening, also in the Quakers meeting house, I'm giving a talk on climate change to the group Norwich Vegans.
At 6 o'clock?
Well, it's actually 7 o'clock, but yeah.
Maybe we can come and join the end of it.
Yeah, sure. I have to say, on one of the earlier sessions, I was pretty disappointed with some of the assumptions made about vegans, as if we're a different species. You know, people who adopt a plant-based diet, or at least eat less meat, have a lower carbon footprint, and that's what this day is all about. It doesn't mean that we eat junk food. It doesn't mean that we don't eat organic food. And it doesn't mean that we can't grow our own food in this country. We have been for years. So I'm feeling that, you know, people who eat less meat seem to get a bit of a bad press today, and I've got no idea why. The other thing was, in terms of...
I think that's a veiled criticism of Simon Fairley's talk, so I wonder if Simon wants to respond. I'm sure that, again, as I said earlier, there's less disagreement than there might appear, but Simon, do you have a response?
I can respond to that. Yes, I'm in favour of people eating less meat. There are quite a number of reasons why people should, but actually, I'm saying that I was asked here to talk about climate and agriculture, and that is basically about the carbon emissions. And I'm presenting evidence that it is exaggerated against ruminants, and that we need to revise our approach to meat and think more in terms of what the benefits of ruminants are and less targeting of them. What I'd also say is that there's actually a massive amount of propaganda coming out. You may not call it propaganda, I call it propaganda, which is against me. Let's call it advertising, right? Which is convincing people to be vegan. Now, in some ways that's very good. The more vegans there are, the more meat there's left for those who want to eat meat. But what's as long as they don't come to my kitchen and I have to cook them. But what I think is interesting in this is that the publicity about meat and being vegan is somehow starting to outclass and put into the shadow the far more important business of getting rid of fossil fuels. That's the crucial thing. If we get rid of fossil fuels, the amount of livestock will stabilise at the right amount. It doesn't work in the other direction. I understand why people want to eat less meat, because if you want to do something about climate change, it's a lot easier to just say, right, I'm not going to do that, and not eat meat. And it's quite possible to have a perfectly good diet, not eating meat, but it won't solve climate change. What we have to do is to stop flying and stop driving and all these things.
Yeah, but
and they are
want to stop flying too.
Well, okay, that's great. I'm not arguing against that. I'm arguing against the concentration and the focus, which is increasing on anti-meat, when actually the meat thing is a very small percentage of the big problem.
I'm sure Simon has nothing against vegans personally.
No, some of my best friends.
I mean, I don't want to speak if there's somebody who hasn't spoken before, because I'm aware that I've spoken before. I wanted to kind of swerve it around, because I think the food conversation is very interesting, but I think irresolvable, actually. But I don't know whether people remember back in the day, there used to be something called CRAGs, which were carbon reduction action groups. The reason I raise this, because I was very struck by Anne's talk, and it's something that I've been thinking about for a very long time, and one of her key points was live in a community that you know well or have a good relationship with, and you might be able to help other people and they might be able to help you. Now, CRAGs have sort of, as far as I know, slightly disappeared, but it seems to me that we need a CRAG-style network for adaptation. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, because I don't hear people talking about this. There are a squillion NGOs looking at mitigation, but I'm not aware of lots and lots of NGOs that are thinking about adaptation. And it feels like after this summer, we need to get busy on it, really. So that, anyway, I just thought I'd lump that out there, see if anyone knows what's going on so far and what we might be able to do.
Just before I take further comments on that, can you just say a tiny bit more about what you mean by a CRAG-style network for adaptation? What would that be?
Well, so here's the thing. So I'm not sure, you see. I feel like we need something like it. I think it would be like, I wasn't in a CRAG, actually, but I knew of people at work who were, and they were taking it quite seriously. They were looking at their own footprint. There's lots of stuff going on. They were walking around with heat-sensitive monitors in their neighbourhood to see which houses needed a focus on insulation and so on. So, it's kind of like quite grown-up stuff, really. And I feel like we need something similar on adaptation. Now, interestingly, I've lived on my road for 5 years. I have 3 sympathetic neighbours, which we're very lucky to have, who get this stuff. And 2 years ago, I said, I think what we should do is have a no fossil fuels day, a bit like we did, Simon, at Moncton one time. We went without fossil fuels. Do you remember it? And so in that model, I was thinking, right, as a road, the people who want to can have a little go. We'll do it in the autumn, which is easier. We'll have a little go at trying to live without fossil fuels, to in a sense, to simulate your experience and work out what we need to do, because there was a lot of interesting learning that came out of that. Still haven't done it, and I really care about this stuff. So, in a sense, I don't know what the answer to that question is. I'm just really struck by this gap. So if the gap is there, I wonder collectively what we might do about it and start to think about.
Thank you very much. Anyone got a response to that before I go on further? Is that
Also,
kind
sort of adds on. It's not really a response.
Yeah, go
on. So in the climate job stuff, we sort of said, here's an endpoint. I think this is a bit what the transition network did. They sort of said, well, this is where we want our town to get to. What do we have to do to get there? I wonder whether we're looking at mitigation and flood protection thing, rather than just going, what's the flood risk for the next 10, 15 years? What are the, what's the heat waves going to do in the next 10, 15 years? If, someone mentioned that Norwich might be underwater zone. I don't know whether that's true. I've not looked at the things. But I think it's important to take to look at the long term and work out, because there's no point building a floodwall to defend against a thing if in 50 years' time it's going to be half the size it should have been, and therefore maybe building the wall wasn't the best thing we should have done in the first place. So I think it's important to take a long-term view for it and work out where we're going to be, 50 years' time, 100 years' time, and then you can sort of look more near time.
There is a
context.
There was a little video that went around Facebook after Storm Desmond of the flood wall in Keswick, which had been built in 2012, overtopping, and it's got a glass glass. The top bit of it's glass, so you can see the water coming up, and then it goes. So flood walls are all okay until you get a bigger flood.
This is the limits of adaptation, of course. I think you had a question.
That sort of adaptation.
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not very good at standing up. But this is just a general comment that it's my belief that in the UK, some of our brightest and best graduates go into marketing and advertising. And if you look at TV ads, you can really see the product of all this brilliance. And what marketing does, what people use marketing to, is to sell stuff, doesn't it? And I'm a bit the hardcore minimalist myself. My dad worked in marketing, so I can really see this. And so what I'd like to say is like Christmas, okay? That is a real hardcore materialistic thing coming up. How many of you exchanged Christmas presents? I stopped doing that 8 years ago. And I've got 4 teenage children, so obviously I'm not popular with my family. And I think, following on from that, I won't be spending long, children are often our worst enemies in this because they're the ones that drive consumerism. So, for example, in my family, I've actually been living in Guernsey until recently, where everything was within a 2-mile radius. Our car expired, so I was like, yes, we get rid of the car, we force the kids to take buses, to walk, to cycle. And there's my 2 daughters telling my husband to get a new car. And, that's the sort of pressure people are dealing with. And, the kids are getting that because they're absorbing all this marketing, and it's standing up to your own family. That's extremely difficult. So,
Okay, let's see, are there any fresh hands? No, so we'll go back. Oh yes, there's a fresh hand, and then another fresh. No, you're not fresh.
If I could follow up from those remarks, some of us were around in the 70s. For others who weren't, nevertheless it exists. It's history. The 70s is the only time, I think, when there was a general and widespread concern about environmentalism. Now, the situation was really very well described just then. What I draw from that is that things have to get a lot worse before there will be the kind of radical change which is needed. I don't know what other people think of that.
Yes, the difficulty is that we don't really have a great deal of time, do we?
no.
So let's see, well, who should we go to? Yes, Andrew.
Yeah. I mean, following on from several of the previous points, one thing I think which is coming out of discussion a lot about personal behavioural change, but not enough about what's wrong systemically. And you touched on it, but really, with the, where is the power in all of this? And it is in the neoliberal economy and the advertising. And it also taps back to what you were saying actually about Asher's talk, that he was also sort of really talking about behavioural change at the individual level. And the question I asked him, which he didn't actually answer, was how can you actually try to get that behavioural thing into policy? And we actually need to get that, we need to get governments to respond to this. And so all that psychological stuff he had, we need to be applying to how you talk to governments as well as how you talk to individuals. But then what we need to do is actually get the sort of marketing stuff turned around. So for example, public service advertising about climate change. And the classic example to model for this is what happened with the AIDS campaign in the 80s. I mean, the government knew there was a problem, there was a public health issue, and they put all these adverts out, and you can laugh at them now, perhaps the way they were done and so on, but they were effective in getting the message out. And we actually need something like that on climate change to engage people and to engage the policymakers. And it can be done. People like Asher know all the psychology, but they're directing it at the individual behaviours rather than at the power makers and turning around that side of things.
I mean, they stop everybody smoking.
And the smoking,
Yeah. There's a fresh head.
Yeah, just following on from what Andrew just said, I think one of the things that has become clear to me, I work for Clive Lewis, is that often Labour MP for Norwich South, is that often policymakers are told fairly comforting things by scientists which just aren't really true. And I think one example of that, and I know he's not here to defend himself, but Brian mentioned, when he was showing us his very good graphs, mentioned negative emissions technologies. And you tackled him a little bit on BECCS.
Asher, I think.
Sorry?
You mean Asher?
Was it Asher? Yes, sorry. But the fact is that, you mentioned BECCS when you were in your question, but no carbon capture and storage has worked at scale. The kind of level that we're asked to imagine that it's going to be able to produce in order to meet our targets under Paris is way beyond anything we have any right to expect. And yet policymakers are told this, politicians are told this by, for example, the Climate Change Committee and the IPCC. And so they can produce these nice smooth graphs showing that we can do a general decline down into the, we so long as we start reducing in the next 20, 30 years. This is just not true. I mean, it may be true, but at the moment it's not true. We don't have that technology, and there's no reason particularly to believe that we're going to get it. It's magical thinking. So you know, scientists need to, you know, start being honest with policymakers.
Can I respond to that?
Well, just before you do, I just want to kind of point about greenhouse on that. In our Facing Up to Climate Reality project, we are going to be doing some criticism of geoengineering projects on exactly this ground. So that's something to look forward to when that book appears. Joe, you haven't had a chance yet.
Two things I just wanted to mention.
Could you stand?
Can you stand?
You. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, better.
Two things just I wanted to mention. One, in terms of policy makers, I wonder where they feel safe to actually make a move. I'm one of those people, possibly that gentleman was mentioning, the people that normally didn't come to these kind of things. So 4 years ago, a bit of an existential crisis for me, and I kind of all of a sudden realised. So I'm that camp outside. Since then, I've been kind of catapulted into this kind of place. It's very interesting, but you know, policymakers don't feel safe to make changes that are unpopular with the public. So one of the things I kind of want to say is that I was out there. If there were more like me, we'd be rattling on with the policymakers. That's one thing. So I think in terms of individual behaviour and power, it is about, you know, it is about sharing some of this stuff. The other thing, just to mention to anybody who doesn't know, who might not be attending on Wednesday, Plan B Earth is a charity that is currently in litigation with the UK government on their climate targets, basically challenging them on their current model relying on negative emissions technology. So we unfortunately lost our case and are appealing, but there's another case going on at the moment, and that is being heard on Wednesday, I think. Thursday, 4th, thank you, about Heathrow, and totally challenging Heathrow only on the issue of climate. So in terms of you know, how we can impact policymakers and affect them, two things really. There are lots of people who really would care if they just knew a little bit more, and I was one of them. And the second thing, have a look at Plan B Earth, and if you can support them in any way, that would be great.
Thank you. Yeah?
I'd just like to build on that comment.
Can you stand?
Yeah, just like to build on the comment when you were saying that, in your view, that the politicians are getting too much of a good news story coming through. It's that, to me, reminds me of, say, how the medical profession is dealing with, say, the smoking issue. I think that's ludicrous. I'm sorry. Because, you know, you've got Al Gore, The Inconvenient Truth, which was out there however many years ago, who's saying that you know, that essentially we've got a system that's broken because you've got it controlled by people from running these mega industries and the law and you know, throughout the political system, and they're invested in it. And so the point is that what happens is people have these existential crises. They actually then begin to realise we're killing our kids, and that is the message. That is the message that needs to be sent through and understood by people in positions of relative power. That if we do not change, if we don't change, then this is what we're doing. And I think when you get to that point when you think, actually, it's a bit like the moment where, you know, you've got climate change or you've got the hurricane. Actually, the hurricane is here now, and if we're not doing things now, we're damaging future generations. So it's at that point when you think, Jesus, it's got to change, and that is quite a powerful moment, I think. And it's about, as I said, with Ash's presentation, the last one, there it is. It's a national scandal. Is that, you know, car emissions killing our children, and we're all part of it. And that's when you realise it is a kind of war situation. People with a little bit of knowledge and understanding of this stuff are going along in their kind of comfortable ways, but it has to change. And it's like, really, it's about understanding that it is a kind of war scenario, and that now we've got to push politicians and send that message. I think that's the one. If there's anything, for all those selfish and self-centered people, if there's nothing else, they might care about their kids. So it's maybe getting this message, linking them to their lifestyle and thinking about their kids. Maybe that's the first step. Because we're all sort of lovely and nice here.
Okay, thanks. Teresa?
several different threads together. I don't quite know how this would work, but we do need to get the message out there more widely, I think, although we have heard that apparently the majority of people are concerned about the environment. But I think we also need to get positive messages out. And what we heard this morning about the jobs and all of that way of looking at things seems to me to be self-evidently a better way for everybody to live. Everybody would benefit from, and they'd enjoy life more if life were organised on those lines. So that's one strand. Another strand is taking the thought about advertising and how powerful it is, and Plan B, who are actually represented by lawyers who have the climate change at heart, and there's also Client Earth, also lawyers who act on behalf of the environment. If one could somehow recruit advertising people into this whole area to get these messages into the mainstream, because they're not in the mainstream as they should be, especially all the positive stuff. So we need, people need to have a realistic idea of what we're heading for, which I think most people don't, but we also have to have out there in mainstream discourse really solid, positive ways forward.
Yeah, just one quick thought on that in terms of the very good points, Teresa, but in terms of the advertising thing, one has to be a little bit careful. What advertisers are good at is selling particular products, right? But we're not really talking about anything like a product. And there are ways of selling products which are very effective, which are not going to be good news for us. So for example, if you say to people, get a solar panel, it's really cool, everyone's getting one. That can be an effective marketing strategy, but what you're actually encouraging people then to do is to try to be cool. So they might buy a solar panel, they might stick it on their roof where all their neighbours can see it rather than a south-facing roof, and they might also buy lots of other cool products and cool holidays.
I'm not talking about advertising products, I'm talking about...
Sure, I'm just warning about, don't give too much power to the marketers.
No, using marketing expertise, knowing how to get people to respond, to different messages.
Yes, but we have to do it in a way which is holistic.
Absolutely.
It's quite challenging for advertisers to get into that mindset. There's a new person at the back.
Yeah, I'm not actually entirely new, I'm afraid, but...
fairly new.
Anyway, fairly new, I would say. So I think we've talked a bit about, a lot of people have talked about getting the message across, and I've been to climate camp in the past and on climate marches where people call for action on climate chaos and all this kind of thing. And we've talked a bit here about how the political process is key, that it gets too much focused on individual action. I think there's a problem there that the politicians won't lead, they will follow. We need the politicians, but they will follow because people are engaged. But at the moment, we're asking them to act on climate chaos or whatever it is. I mean, no offence to, I understand people out here have specific plans, and we're leaving the current government space to say that they're green because they've moved to gas, and they get to go around and talk about how the UK has managed to decarbonise wild growing, and they're not being challenged enough on that because nobody knows what they should be doing, not really, not in the street, and not, I suspect, to be honest, in this room, exactly, many people. And we leave it so that they talk about how they're focused on electric vehicles, and that seems a good thing, that is a good thing probably, but we don't have a way of holding them to account. And unless you're focused on climate change all of the time, when we talk to somebody, 93% or whatever, Ashton Minns said, people care about this and think it's a problem. Are we collectively doing enough to tell them what the solutions are? Do they know how they can turn around to their MP and say, because you've not done this and because you've not done that here today in this Parliament, you're not a green government? And I would very strongly argue that we're not in that position yet, and that allows people off the hook because we have different ideas of, is it nuclear, is it not, does it involve biofuels, does it not? And I understand that there will have to be all of these debates, but I think if there is a way of coalescing around something that's a bit more specific, that people can understand that if we voted for this, we would get some things in the next 10 years that we would understand would make a difference.
People have to have a vision of what they're...
Exactly, we've got to know what it is. That's got to be a bit more precise.
Okay, we've got to draw towards a close, and it seems to be a good kind of point to end on. So I'm going to invite one or two people who've got their hands up, if they've got some kind of response to that, to make it quickly in a couple of sentences, because we're over time already. So I'm going to take these four people. You've got a couple of sentences each, and then I'll cut you off. Sue.
Thank you very much.
That's one sentence.
Is it not the best way in which to engage people? I live on a council estate, right? And nobody is in the slightest bit interested in climate change. But surely a good way in which to engage people is by pointing out that they can decrease their electricity bills by this business of the windows. That would at least engage them.
Okay.
Why doesn't the council do a flyer thing pointing this thing out?
Thank you. Great. Helen?
I want to directly come back on you. I had a conversation yesterday with somebody who had just come from a meeting with somebody in Michael Gove's office, a civil servant, so not a party, political person. And the person I was talking to had actually said, why is it that Michael Gove is making all these announcements? After being somebody who was so reviled in education, why is he now being seen to be, this very, very green minister?
Yes.
And the off-the-record answer, was, because the Conservative Party are not getting votes from people under 40. And when they look at their voting statistics, people under 40 are not voting for them. And in fact, they're barely voting at all for any major parties. And that is worrying them. So these announcements are because these voices are being heard.
So they will follow if they hear it.
But like you say, it has to be made louder and it has to be more specific so they know exactly that we're not swallowing what they're saying.
Okay. Jonathan, a couple of sentences.
It was a couple more than a couple, but responding
No.
to some of the points made there. Because you said we were able to respond to
Yeah, but we're over time, so two sentences and then I'll stop you.
out there when we're not, we all are here, are out there when we're not here. Since we've been here, 4 wellheads for acid fracking have been proposed in the area where I'm a councillor. The comms guy this morning said, there's only so much space. Austerity and Brexit are blocking out climate change out there. A greenhouse guy who's not here talked about deep hope. We need to find the space between the disasters that will happen and the catastrophes that are going to happen in the future. But to do that, what we need to do is make sure our mitigation leads adaptation spend, not the other way around. Because if we focus on short-term resilience, we will end up with long-term catastrophe.
Okay.
So long-term resilience requires a mitigation-led approach. That gives us that deep hope.
Thanks. Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think we have to get out. Most of these meetings, and I've been attending them for more than 30 years, is preaching to the converted most of the time. And if you don't get out there to other people, and that's why we try to engage with the trade unions and what Jonathan and Peter have done in that area. For 30 years I've been campaigning to close Sellafield, and it's been a dismal failure. Because and when we talk to my colleagues, I say, right, why? Because you can't say to those 10,000 workers, where are you going to get alternative jobs at the same rates of pay, decent conditions, keep your family in a good livelihood, and we can't do it. So if the language, and the other point I want to make is, the language used is quite elitist often by Greens, and that's throughout Europe. The Green parties right throughout Europe are in a minority in most countries. They are, the profile has been studied, they're mostly well-educated voters, understand the complexities. The vast majority don't engage, and that's why. So you have to use language. Instead, even if you go out there and talk to somebody about fossil fuels, you talk about diesel, coal, petrol, gas. Why the carbon?
Yeah, you
most
made your
of the
point.
language you use means nothing to most people.
Thank you. And finally, Jen.
I just want to say something about a related topic which has not been touched on at all today, and that's population. In the session prior to lunch, there's a gentleman at the back who said that the entire population, which is about 60 million of us, should, from the word go, and he was including babies, should be considered as part of the green workforce. Now, I'd like to say that there are thousands of babies and young children in care in this country alone. They could be given better futures by being adopted. Until this issue is addressed, and until such time as human beings can be produced totally carbon neutral and live totally carbon neutral lives, then I think we really shouldn't be producing so many new people.
Okay, well, let no one say we don't engage with radical policy proposals in Greenhouse. Thanks everybody so much for today. I think it's been a vibrant day. If you want to kind of carry on, come along on Wednesday evening, 6 p.m. to the Quaker Meeting House. Maybe hang around now and chat among yourselves, maybe go to a pub or something. Hope to see more of you in the future, and let's face up to climate reality. Thank you.